Hi, everybody. This is part one of a series of videos designed to get you up and running with productions and to do a deep dive into some of the special features that are inside of Premiere Pro Productions, particularly for collaboration, as well as just organization for long form work. To get started, I'm going to go ahead and jump over into Adobe Premiere, and I'm just going to go full screen here and just show you guys a couple of quick pictures that'll help to explain what productions are, so that you'll have kind of a good baseline as we move forward and we dive deeper into all the individual bits and pieces. To get started, the Premiere Pro project file really hasn't changed much in the 25 plus years of Adobe Premiere. The project file is something that contains sequences and clips. You guys have all used it. Anytime you create a new project inside of Premiere, you create this file that lives on a drive someplace, either on shared storage or on a local drive on your machine. Now, a project file has always been geared around the idea of one editor opening it, making changes, saving those changes, and closing it again. So when it comes to collaborative workflows, a project really isn't enough to enable this ability to collaborate. We don't want to get in a situation where anybody can overwrite each other's work, and that's one of the challenges when you're working with a single project file. Another challenge of a project file is as you begin to add more clips to it, as you begin to add more sequences to it, that project file begins to grow in size. Now that's fine if you're doing short form work or if you are doing some sort of episodic show, or even for maybe short films and things along those lines. But when you start to add, thousands and thousands and thousands of clips, if you're working on a documentary where you've got 5 years worth of archival footage, a single project file is going to break down. It's going to start to take longer and longer to open it. It takes longer and longer to save. And particularly if you like to autosave the way I do, that is a disruption to the workflow. So productions are designed to handle this by creating a container that actually holds multiple Premiere Pro projects. And those projects can be dedicated to certain tasks. You might have some projects that have editing sequences. Other projects might have your clips organized. You might have a project dedicated to sound effects or music. And all of those are part of this entire whole that we call a Premiere Pro production. Now, when you're working inside of a production, what a production actually looks like is it is a folder on disk. It's something that you can actually browse to using your operating system. You will see subfolders and Premiere Pro projects within that production. You want to make sure that Premiere manages this folder. Don't put any media in there. Your media can live concurrently in a separate folder next to the production folder. And that's also true of things like scratch disks. You want to make sure that those are all separate. They're in a separate physical location. Treat this as a single unit. The idea is you open the production first, and then you dive into the bits and pieces that you're going to currently be working with. So all the editors can open the production at the same time, but then they're going to open up different bits and pieces depending on what they happen to be working on. I might be editing Reel 1, somebody else might be editing Reel 2. Productions allow for this type of work. They're also very, very flexible in the organization. So what I mean by this is you can create the folder structure that best suits what you're trying to work on. I'm going to be showing a little bit in this video series a couple of different ideas for how to organize a production, but just think about the way you currently use a single project with different folders and subfolders. You can use a production in the exact same way and just make sure that at the end stage, if you look on this graphic on the screen here, you'll see I have a folder called Scene 1. In the production, there's actually a project file called Scene 1, and we'll talk more about that as we go through this. Some of the benefits of working with productions, first off, because you're dealing with a large amount of small project files, each of those project files typically opens very, very fast and saves very, very fast. So this helps in your overall workflow. Because these productions, anything inside of a production actually has a relationship with other bits and pieces. So for example, if I have a folder that contains a bunch of projects, these projects actually have an awareness of the other projects. So if I have a sequence in one project, the clips can actually live in a separate project. We'll talk more about that in just a second. The other big benefit of this is obviously collaboration. When you're inside of a production, you can see at a glance what the other editors are currently working on, and you have a sense as to where you should be while you're working. On the screen right now here, you'll notice that the Cuts project is currently open with a green pencil. That indicates that that's an area that I'm actively making changes to. I can see red lock icons for the projects that Todd and Marjorie are currently working on. I can still open these projects and use them as sources. I can mark in and out points. I just can't make any changes in that project like deleting clips or renaming clips, which makes it really, really easy to work together. Now, cross-project referencing, this is what I meant by kind of having this relationship and this understanding. This isn't just a folder of a bunch of Premiere Pro projects. These projects are aware of each other. And what this allows for from an organizational standpoint is it lets me organize clips into one project and have my editing sequence actually live by itself in a completely different project. So in this way, multiple editors could take advantage of organized clips within one project, but they're each cutting in their own individual project. And we remember this information. So there's no duplicate clips that have to be generated in an old way of working where you would have like maybe multiple Premiere Pro project files. You copy a sequence from one to the other, you end up getting duplicates of all the clips on that sequence. That's not the case in a production. In this case, if I were to take these 3 clips, drag them and drop them onto this sequence, this project would be aware of the media project and it would remember the relationship that these clips live there. So if I reveal those clips in the project, they'll actually, Premiere will actually open up the media project and it will highlight the clip that I've requested. So that relationship is something we call cross-project referencing, and it's part of the secret sauce of productions that makes it so valuable in a collaborative environment. In this segment, we're going to be going in and covering a lot of the basics of setting up a production, how to create one for the first time, get your workspace to incorporate the production panel. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about the basics of figuring out where you want to store your production for effective collaboration. So to get started, I'm going to jump into Premiere Pro, and the very first thing we need to do is create the production. By going to the File menu, I can click on New, and choose Production here. And by doing this, this is going to give me a screen with a place to name the production and where we want to put the production. Now, this is a really, really key thing to be aware of. The location for the production, this needs to be a place where all your editors can access this. If you're all within a facility and you're using some sort of a shared storage volume, then you're pretty well set up to go. You can put the production folder on the shared storage volume, and that way all the editors in their different bays can actually go in and access the production. If you're not working in a shared environment, if you have to deal with remote collaborators, you need to start thinking about some way of placing this production folder in a way that everybody can access it. And different people are collaborating in different ways remotely. We have some of our customers, our editors like to use remote desktop clients where they're actually remoting into a machine in the office, even when they're working from home, in which case you just continue to use the shared storage in the office. If you need a solution that would allow you to work collaboratively from virtually anywhere with an internet connection, you might want to look at one of our partners, a company called LucidLink. I'm going to be using LucidLink today just to demonstrate this, but the idea behind LucidLink is they have a system where cloud-based storage actually mounts and looks like local network attached storage to the operating system and thus to Adobe Premiere. So I actually have a drive on my system simply called Adobe that gives me like 1 petabyte worth of storage space. And that's actually where I'm going to place my production folder today. And so that way, all of my team members that all have access to LucidLink would also be able to use a production. But just know, productions don't require any internet connection within a facility. It was actually designed around this idea of working at secure facilities where they don't allow for internet connectivity. But when you need it, There are partner solutions out there, or remote desktop clients will allow you to have that remote access if needed. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Lucid Link volume here. I'll go ahead and click on that and just go into my laptop so you can see here's the Lucid Link icon. You can see I'm selecting Adobe as the location for this. I have a folder called Carl Media, and that's where I'm going to choose to put this. And then I'm going to give this a name. So we're going to call this movie production. We'll keep it simple. All right. Once I hit create, what that is actually doing is creating a folder that lives on that volume, and it also creates a new project file for me. So now at this point, I'm actually ready to get started. Now you'll notice that this is created, it's using a workspace here that's called production. You're welcome to use this workspace. It kind of moves everything slightly over to the right and leaves some space on the left-hand side of the screen for this production panel. But this production panel is going to be key to seeing what's going on inside of the production. And in later videos, we'll dive into like what the icons mean, some of the different right-click menu options. But for right now, just know that this is where you're going to start setting up and you're going to start organizing your production. Couple of things to be aware of. If you ever need to know where your production is stored, this flyout menu up at the top has an option at the bottom called Reveal Production. On a Mac, it'll show Reveal Production in Finder. And by doing this, this will bring up an operating system box, and I can see here is the folder in question. Now, if I close this production, I'll choose File, Close Production, and we'll go back to the basic screen. Just note, to get into that production, I can do one of two things. I can either go to File, Open Production, and this will give me a list of all the different productions that I currently have access to. If you need to manually select a production, click the Browse button. And this is very, very important. Click the folder that has the name of the production. So in this situation, if I wanted to open up the newly created movie production, I would click the folder, select the folder, and then click Choose. And that will open up the production for me, and then I can dive into the project as necessary. Now, an even easier way to remember this, I'll go ahead and close the production. If you know the name of the project that lives inside of that production, at any point, either from your operating system or from the welcome screen to Premiere, you can actually just click on the project and the production will open. Premiere always knows if a project is part of a production, and it will open the production for you and the project in one easy step. So those are the different ways of getting into a project inside of a production. This is how to create a production and get started. At this point, my production panel is looking pretty blank. So this is where I would start to use the new project and the new folder buttons to start to kind of build out the infrastructure of what I want my project to look like. I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of how you might want to take that blank production panel in Premiere and organize it in a way that's useful for you and your entire editorial team. So to get started, I'm actually already inside of a production that I've created here. If we come over here to the production panel, you'll notice on the top level of this, everything is kind of just organized in folders. And a useful trick here is to use a number at the beginning of the folder names so that you can kind of organize them in the order in which you want them. Traditionally, the way I typically go is I'll start with like 5, 10, 15, 20. If I know something is near the bottom of the list, I'll give it a number like 100. I always leave some space between the numbers because inevitably I'll forget something as I'm starting to build out the overall production, and I'll want to add a number that's somewhere like maybe in between 5 and 10, for example. So I've already gone through and done this, and you'll notice that these folders are kind of organized based on what I'm going to be putting inside of these different projects. The media folder, if I twirl that open, you'll see that there's a series of different folders and a couple of projects in here dealing with sound effects and some graphics and titles. If I go into dailies, these are each day of my film shoot. So This project is actually organized around a short film. And so this was shot over 13 days. And you can see that each day of shooting, when the footage came in, the assistant editor created a new project, called it day one, and imported the footage into that project. When day two came in, it just basically did the exact same thing over again. So that by the end of shooting, you'll have individual projects for each of those days shooting. So if you know that a particular shot happened on day one or day two, you can immediately go back into that project and find it. This also helps when you have alternate takes that you need to look for, because if I'm in the timeline, I can take advantage of that cross-project referencing that we mentioned in our introductory video. I can actually right-click on a clip and choose Reveal in Project, and this will open up the project that contains that particular clip and allow me to see if maybe there's some alternate takes that happen to have been shot on that same day. So this is one method of organizing where if you're shooting something that, you're dealing with dailies, you're shooting things where you might be shooting completely out of order, but you want to make sure that each of your raw shots are kind of in the same location. This is one method of organizing that might make sense to you. You'll notice if I go through and look at some of the other folders in here, I've actually got scene folders so that we can break this up into different scenes. As we get the raw material in, we can kind of reorganize things. As we group stuff into multicams to synchronize picture and sound, we might move those multicams over into the scene projects so that we have all the footage necessary for each scene so that an editor can cut together a scene. And then as things kind of progress from there, we might break things out into reels. So if I have like a 60-minute film, for example, I might have 3 different reels that are around 18 to 22 minutes, somewhere in that range. And again, that gives different editors the ability to be working on different pieces as they move along. An assistant editor might be organizing scene 6 while the lead editor is cutting scene 2. Later in the process, an assistant might be doing sound design on reel 2 while the lead editor cuts reel 3. It makes this kind of a nice process, and you break it up based on how your team is going to work together. In some cases, you might have just different editing projects named for the different editors. Here I have a folder called Scratch Projects. I can be cutting in my Scratch project using the same source material that Marjorie is working with, but she's over in her own Scratch project kind of, doing something completely different. So that's part of the key in organizing your production. You want to make sure that each of these projects is sort of bite-sized, maybe just has a couple of sequences in it or has, a small amount of clips, a couple hundred is fine, but something that's small enough that'll open very quickly and very easily. Similarly, things like sound effects probably are going to live in their own separate project. Music cues might live in their own separate project. Let me show you one other example of a production here. I'm going to go ahead and close this production. And I'm going to open up a different production. And this is a production that I have. Let me go ahead and browse to it here. We'll go back to my Carl Media folder. And this one's called Around the World Episodic. And I'll go ahead and open this one up. And we'll just open up a project here just to get the full interface. So working in this production, this is actually geared around the idea of doing multiple episodes of the same series over time. So depending on how you want to break things up, you might do a production for each season. You might do a single production that has multiple seasons in it. It really just depends on how big you want the production to be, how many times you actually go back and you pull footage from older episodes into a newer episode. Having it all in one production can make that very, very easy. Oh yeah, we have that one scene from episode 5 of last season. Let's just go and bring in that footage and we'll make that a montage sequence or something along those lines. So the way I've got this one organized is instead of having it organized by dailies and then scenes and then reels and then having a cuts folder where the different cuts are being put together, this one is actually organized around the idea of having 3 seasons of a series. And if I go into season 1 and twirl this down, each season you can see has different episodes, 101, 102, 103, and so on. If I go into this, you can see now we're seeing something that looks a little bit similar to what you saw in my other production, where there's a dailies folder, there's a scenes folder, an acts folder of full episodes, and then turnover cuts. So this is a different idea for organizing a production. Just thinking out loud, if you're a documentary filmmaker, you might want to organize this by story arc, or you might want to have folders as you're shooting interviews. Each of those are going to end up in a different project. And then as you're starting to put story arcs together, you might want to do an entire through line as an edit that then you're going to cut that into the final film. So each of those might be different projects that you might be working on. It's really up to you. It's fully customizable however you want to organize it. But I wanted to show you some examples of some sort of built out productions, because that blank production panel can be a little daunting when you first see it. So just know that, in a lot of cases, people build out these types of folders and subfolders and oftentimes reuse the same organization from production to production. I want to talk a little bit about what the icons are actually doing when you're working inside of the production panel. So this is going to explain a lot of what the green pencil, the hollow and solid icons, and the lock icons actually mean inside of your production panel. So to get started, I'm here inside of one of my productions, and I'm actually working with a different editor. This is an editor named Mike Burton. You'll notice in the production panel, there's really two main columns. There's the name column for all the different production items, and then there's a project lock column. And this lock column actually displays the names of any editors you're collaborating with. Anybody who has parts of the production open, their name will display here. Now, the key thing about this name field, I want to take a moment to just cover this. If I go into my Premiere settings and look under the collaboration portion of preferences, you'll see that the username is actually found in this area here called project locking. And there's a tiny field here, and I currently just have my first and last name kind of running together here. This is simply a text field. If you ever need to modify this or make changes to it, I recommend doing it when your productions are closed, because whenever you open a production, it's going to be locked to whatever username is placed in that field. But I've seen some very creative uses of this field. If just having the name is not enough, I've seen people put in Edit Bay 1, Edit Bay 2, Edit Bay 3, so they know what door to knock on. I've even seen people put phone numbers or extensions into this field. It's completely customizable, whatever will work for your team, so that if you need to find or get into a locked project, you know who to call, who to contact to tell them, hey, are you actively working in that, or is it just sitting in the background? Close it. I need to get into it. That's how you work with the project lock column. It's designed for you to give you the information necessary to know who is working on what. Now, as far as the icons are concerned, you'll notice that there's really a few different states these project icons can actually be in. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this sound effects project here that Mike's got open just to kind of showcase this. Icons are either hollow, indicating I don't have that open, or solid, indicating that that's a project that I currently already have open inside of my copy of Premiere. From there, the icons either have no lock indication, meaning, hey, it's up for grabs. Anybody can get into that. Nobody is currently using it. Or it'll have a red lock icon. That means somebody else on your team has that project open and is making changes to it. Finally, if I have a project open and I'm making changes to it, it will have a green pencil. You can have as many projects open as you want. Again, in the nature of organizing a production, tiny bite-sized projects, having a bunch of them is preferable to having like one massive project with all of your media that takes forever to open. It's better to break it up into smaller chunks and open multiple projects. Now, the key about who can make changes to a project, it's first come, first served. The first person who opens up a project gets the green pencil, and they're the ones who can go in and make changes to it. So if I double click on this, you can see I already have this project open. If I right click on an item here, I can cut this, I can copy it, I can rename it, I can modify it, I can do all the things because I have full read-write privileges on this particular project. Now, this project is a sound effects project. Mike Burton currently is inside of it editing. And if I double click on this, I still have access to it. But when I right click on these items, you'll notice cut, clear, duplicate. A lot of options are actually grayed out. That's exactly what I would expect. I don't have write privileges to this. I don't have the ability to modify it and make changes to it. But I do have the ability to edit with it. So if I have a different project open, in this case, I've got my full edit aspect project. This has my editing sequence, which I have open here. I have read-write privileges to this sequence. I have read-only privileges to this source media, but that doesn't prevent me from double-clicking on one of these sound effects. And I'll just expand this out a little bit. I could come in here, mark an in point, mark an out point. And if I want to cut this into one of my sound effects tracks, in this case, I'm just going to do the lazy way. I'll drag it and drop it instead of using insert or overwrite. But you can see it works the exact same way. I have the ability to make changes to the project that I have the green pencil for. Now, one thing I can't show you today, but I just want you to be aware of, we try and let you know when a project is locked in a lot of different ways. And there's even a notification that comes up if somebody who has the project open in read-write mode makes changes and saves those changes. So first off, you'll notice in this project, here at the name of the project, it's showing me the editor that has the project currently open in read-write mode. It's showing me a lock icon here. So not just in the production panel, this is like all the projects at a glance, but every project panel on your screen is going to show the name of a lock, whoever owns the lock on a locked project. It shows me a lock here. There's also a lock icon down here. If Mike closed this project, his name would go away, the lock would go away, this red lock would stay, meaning that I still just have this project in read-only mode. There are times where you might just want to open a project in read-only mode because you don't want to accidentally make changes to it. So having the lock on isn't necessarily a bad thing unless you need to get in there if I needed to add sound effects. If Mike unlocked this project or he closed it on his end, I would have the ability to click on this red lock down here in the bottom. I don't have to close it and reopen it to get read-write access. I could click on this lock icon. Right now, it's not going to let me because Mike still owns the lock for it. That's fully understandable. The other thing I can't quite show you is if Mike makes changes to this, you'll notice in the project tab, next to the lock icon, there's an area in between this lock icon and the little flyout or hamburger menu that's here. A little yellow exclamation point in a triangle, a little icon will show up in that space. If that happens, that means that you're looking at a stale copy of the project. So if Mike added a bunch more sound effects and hit save, I wouldn't see those until I go to this flyout menu. And in this flyout menu, I choose Refresh Project. So this is found right here. You can see it's grayed out right now because there's nothing to refresh at this point. But if Mike were to make those changes, I would see those changes update and I would have the ability to click on Refresh Project. So again, don't have to close the project and reopen it in order to see those changes happen. We are going to dive into what cross-project referencing is inside of Premiere Productions, how it's useful in kind of staying organized with where your media is versus where your sequences are, and some of the benefits of being able to go back and find what you're looking for using the Reveal in Project command. So to show this, I'm still in my Century Movie Time production, And I've got an editing sequence that's currently open. This is actually going to be found in my Carl Scratch project. So I've just created an editing sequence within this project. You'll notice that this is just living by itself. In fact, I'm going to change the name of it from editing sequence to selects, because it's pretty common to throw a bunch of clips as you're going through your footage and you go, oh, there's a good shot. Oh, that's a good soundbite there. Putting that all into a selects reel, you might do that in a Scratch project just to kind of get it organized. Now, you'll notice there's no media inside of this Scratch project. So I'm going to actually use media from day one of shooting here. And if I double click on my day one project, you can see I've already got it open and I've got it set up here. So I'm going to start looking at some of the footage that we shot on day one and making a couple of selects here. So I'll just start by double clicking on this shot here. This was shot up in the woods in Northern California here. So I'm just going to kind of find a good frame to start with the bicycle running in here. We'll mark that as an in point. And then we'll get the bicycle flying in frame and a little bit of establishing of the forest. And I'll mark that as an out point. And now I can go in and I can pick and choose exactly where I want to cut this in. I'll go ahead and choose to insert that at the beginning of my timeline here. And you can see we've now just cut that piece into the beginning of my timeline. Okay. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out here. This is like basic editing 101. But in a production, because my clip lives in one project and my sequence lives in another project, there's a little something different going on under the hood inside of the production. And I want to call this out. First off, I'm going to go back to my Carl Scratch project. Where's my clip? I don't have a clip in the Scratch project, even though the select sequence is in this project and there's a clip on the sequence. This is a fundamental difference between just opening up two Premiere project files and trying to work with them, like organize media into one and have an editing sequence in another. With a production, there is this link, this relationship between the different projects. This clip lives in the day one project. There is only one copy of this clip that lives inside of the day one project. So this eliminates any type of duplication of media, unless I specifically duplicate a clip and I tell Premiere, hey, I want a copy of this, it doesn't create any duplicates. So what this also means is if I need to go back and find an alternate take or an alternate shot, if my media is organized in the production where, all of the same day of shooting is found in the same project, we make that relatively easy. So by right-clicking on this clip, there is an option called Reveal in Project. Now, this is different from match framing. I want to just point this out. I don't have to have any other projects open to kind of match frame into this same clip here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and close the sound effects project. I'm even going to close the day one project here where this clip originated from, because I really want to show you what Premiere will do for you here. And we'll go ahead and say, yes, I'm going to save the changes I made to that. Okay, so here I've got this clip on my timeline. If I just wanted to look at it and maybe shift it or find a different edit point in this clip, I can still hit match frame and it will come up in the source monitor and I can still do different things with it. But if I need to manipulate it in the bin, I need to maybe like modify some settings in the bin, or if I want to find that clip because I'm looking for any adjacent clips that were shot on the same day, I use a different menu command, something called Reveal in Project. And Reveal in Project will tell Premiere, go and find this clip for me wherever it happens to live. So when I right-click on this, it will go through and automatically open up the day one project and it will highlight that clip for me. And if I go to an icon view here, I can then start to see, oh wait, here's all this other footage that was shot on the same day here in the forest. So now I can start to look at and see if maybe there's a different take or a different shot that I might want to use in conjunction with this. So that's the big benefit of this cross-project referencing. There's actually two different ways of working with projects that are not inside of your production yet. It is always possible to open up a standalone Premiere Pro project and work within it. Premiere will give you a little bit of a message to let you know that that's what you're doing. And just know that if you cut anything into an existing project, it's not going to behave in the same way because that project, the originating project, isn't part of the production yet. The other thing that you can do, and this is great in cases where you're reusing common elements over and over again, is you can always add a standalone project to the production, and we'll showcase how that works as well. So to get started, I'm in my Carl Scratch project. I've got my selects and I've got a clip here. I want to try and find like maybe a music clip to go along with this. And I know that I have an existing project that I have worked on before here. So it's always possible to open up a standalone project by clicking on Open Project and then pointing at that project. Here's my loops project that I have here. I'll go ahead and click Open. And you'll notice that this is actually just giving me a little bit of information here. All this is saying is that this project's outside of the production. And what you need to be aware of is that means if I load stuff from it in the source monitor and cut it into a sequence, it's going to put a copy of those clips next to the sequence in the same way that multiple projects would normally work. So I'll go ahead and click OK on this. And you can see here I've got a bunch of folders and subfolders with some different music cues that I might be wanting to use. Now, one way I might actually use this is I might already have a music project inside of Premiere, and I might want to add these clips to that music project. So in this case, I'm going to move some things around on the screen here to give myself room to see both of these. And at this point, I might want to take some of these folders and drag them and drop them over into my existing music project. That's a perfectly valid way of working. If you're doing something like that, I don't need to import this entire loops project into the production at this time, but I want to get a few elements. I'm going to move those elements into an existing project in the production, and then that way they'll stay organized in that project within the production. Just to showcase this, if I were to take one of these music cues and drag it and drop it onto this sequence, if I go back to that project, which was the Carl Scratch project, you'll notice that this clip is now in the Carl Scratch project. You may want that. In most cases, I don't think you would. And if I now try and delete this, it's going to warn me saying, hey, that's in your sequence. Are you sure you want to delete it? If I needed to get that entire loops project into my production, the way I would handle that is a little bit differently, is instead of opening it up, and I'm going to go ahead and close it here. And this is another key point. I just want to call this out right now while we're talking about this. You'll notice that when I'm clicking on the name of the project, I'm going to this flyout menu, I'm using an option called Close Project. I'm not using Close Panel. This ensures that the project is actually closed, and that's what we want to make sure and do. Now, I want to add that project into my production, and I want to put it in the Audio Elements folder. So I'm going to select the Audio Elements folder, and I'm going to right-click on it and choose this menu option here, Add Project to Production. This does a number of nice things in the background. Even if this project is from like a really old copy of Premiere, it will rev it for me. It will update this project to the latest and greatest version of Premiere, whatever I happen to be running. So it matches all the rest of the production. It also assigns a unique identifying number to that. And that's one of the ways that the production panel kind of tracks where your clips live. And we'll get into what that means in a future video here. But I'm going to go ahead and choose Add Project to Production. I'll go to my desktop. There's my loops project. And now I'll open that up. It's actually telling me it's going to make a copy of this. So the original project on the desktop is going to stay there. It's going to remain in place. It's not going to make any modifications or changes to it. But a copy of it is now going to be in the Productions folder. We'll go ahead and click OK. You can see it goes through. It just quickly shows me in the progress panel that this is done. And now I have my Loops 2020 project. And now I can go in and use all of these within the production. And now that this Loops 2020 project is actually in the production, when I take a clip like this classic corporate piece here and I drag it and drop it into my sequence, when I go back to my Carl Scratch project, you'll see it didn't add that duplicate of the clip. It didn't add one to the Scratch project. And when I right click on this and I say reveal in project, guess where it's going to go? To the Loops project. And it's going to twirl down the corporate 30 folder and it's going to highlight that clip for me. That's what I probably want to do. So hopefully this kind of clears up some ideas of how you can use external projects to the production, how to import them correctly into the production panel or the production folder. We always recommend using this right-click Add Project to Production. In theory, you could do this on the operating system level by dragging something in on, like, let's say the Finder where you see the production folder. But again, it doesn't do all the nice things about just verifying that the project is it's current with the current copy of Premiere you're using. It also doesn't assign it a unique identifying number so that we'll be able to find things later on. So best practice, we always recommend using this right-click function, Add Project to Production. We're going to be talking about that message you might be seeing called duplicate IDs and exactly what that means and how to fix it if you do run into it, or whether you need to fix it. In some cases, you might actually not have to even worry about it. But in those cases where you do, we're going to cover all the basics of it. So what this message is, what I'm referring to, if you look down in Premiere, you might see that there's a red exclamation point kind of showcased way down in the lower right corner. And if I click on that, it's going to bring up the events panel, and you'll see that there's a message here called duplicate IDs. Now, when I double click on this, it's going to give me some information here, and we'll cover what that is in just a second. But what is actually going on under the hood? Just like when you go to a website and you type in, www.adobe.com, computers don't really speak words like that. They speak numbers for the most part. And so for every URL like that, there's a number under the hood of actually where you're going to. Same thing is kind of true about productions. Even though every project within your production might have a name like music or day one or something like that, under the hood, Premiere is assigning a unique identifying number to each of these different items. And that's what makes it possible to just go in. If I want to change day one to say day 1A or day 2, it's not going to break any links within the production. So you'll still be able to reveal clips in project. On rare occasions, we can run into some situations where two projects within the production have the same number. It's kind of like having the same street address. Which one am I delivering a package to? If they're both the same, that can create some challenges. So whenever we see duplicate IDs show up in the production, that little red exclamation point is going to show up in the lower right of your copy of Premiere. And when you click on it, it'll show that there's a duplicate ID event going on. In some cases, this is fine. It really depends. If the duplicate IDs are coming from projects that just contain sequences, it's never really going to cause much of a problem within your production. You're not referencing, when you hit reveal in project, you're typically doing that to clips on a sequence. Where this can become a problem is if your media projects, if the day one project, for example, has the same ID as the day two project, Premiere is going to get confused. It's like, well, wait a minute, does this clip live in day one or does it live in day two? So in those circumstances, you might need to do a little bit of housekeeping to correct for this. Now, you'll notice in this error message that comes up on the screen here, it's actually listing off the name of a text file that lives inside the production folder. This text file is your key to figuring out what is causing this duplicate ID message and what do I have to fix to correct for this. So if I go to my Finder, you'll see that I've got the production folder is actually open right now. And you'll notice that there is a text file here called duplicate projects list. And when I double click on that, it's telling me that a couple of the projects in these locations currently have duplicate IDs. The way to fix this is, and this is one of those rare cases where on the operating system level, I'm actually going to make some changes to the production folder. Again, normally we tell you let Premiere sort of manage this, make your changes through the production panel inside of Premiere. This is one of those cases where we're actually going to move some stuff out of the production folder onto the desktop, and then we're going to use that add project to production to bring them back into the production. So the way this would work is basically look at this text file, and you'll see some pathways here. This is currently showing that in my folder called 100 Demos and Explanations, in the 2022 NAB folder, there is a project called HDR Demo. That has a duplicate ID with a different project, something called Scene Edit Detection. Okay, so we need to correct for that. So what I'm going to do is, again, on the Finder level, I'm going to go into that Demos and Explanations, and I'm going to go into the 2022 NAB folder, and I'm going to find these two projects, or maybe since it's just two sharing an ID number, I can just pull one of these out. I'll take the HDR Demo project, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to my desktop. So I'll just grab it, and I'm going to hold down the Command key here to move it to my local desktop. So I'm actually moving it out of the production folder, and I'm moving it onto the desktop. Now to bring that back in and not have a duplicate ID, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into my Demos and Explanations folder within the production panel. I'll highlight this 2022 folder for NAB, and I'll say Add Project to Production, and I'm going to add this HDR demo back into my production. Now, by doing this, Premiere will assign this project a different unique identifier, and that will take care of that duplicate ID problem that we had in the past. So if you ever run into this, first off, if you look at your list and you say, well, wait, those are all editor's projects, they all just contain sequences. My media is safe, it's all organized in separate projects. You can live with that message. It's not as severe as you might think. But when you start seeing situations where your projects that contain clips have this duplicate IDs, use this setup here to actually move stuff out of the production folder and then import it back in using that add project to production command. That'll reassign it a new identifier number. It'll now be a unique item within the production. You won't get that duplicate ID message moving forward. I want to talk about some times where you might want to make duplicate clips. One of the big benefits of working inside of productions has been the fact that it doesn't accidentally create duplicate clips by copying sequences from one project to another. You really have to work at it to create duplicates. And you may ask yourself, like, why would I ever want to make duplicate clips? Well, there are some cases where you might actually want to duplicate some media. And I want to showcase how you can go through and do that. First off, one way that you might have to duplicate clips sometimes is if you're dealing with things like high frame rate footage, and particularly if you want to use high frame rate footage and synchronize audio to something that was shot at a high frame rate. Usually when the clips come into Premiere Pro, we will honor the playback frame rate that the camera specified. So you might be shooting at 120 frames per second. When that footage is brought into Premiere, it looks like silky smooth slow motion footage at 24 frames per second. Obviously, you can't synchronize audio in those situations. So it's kind of a common practice to duplicate a clip. And you can do that at any point in a media bin just by opening up the media bin. So in this case, I'll just open up day one here. And if I needed to duplicate this clip, I can just right click on it and choose duplicate. Now, another situation that we see people wanting to duplicate clips on a large scale is when it's time to do any type of turnover-based workflows. Maybe you're editing at 1920 by 1080 and the director said, hey, we've got that experimental footage from a drone that is shooting in 4K or 6K or 8K. I want to see what it looks like at the native resolution. Well, you don't want to go into the dailies folder and start relinking those files to, the 8K footage, because that's going to impact your assistant editors, other editors that you're working with. If you're trying to do turnovers for color, where you want to unlink all the footage in a timeline and relink it to a new set of footage that's been gone through a color grade, that's another situation where you probably don't want to mess with the original source footage that's found in the dailies folder. So I've got an example here where I've got my edit. This is the edit that I've been working on here for the film. And I've created a separate project that's called Turnover and Conform. So this might be in a situation where I want to get all the clips that are in this sequence, but I want to make new bin items for these. So currently this Turnover and Conform project is completely empty. So probably the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to make a copy of my sequence. So I'm going to grab the icon here for this sequence. I'm going to go up to the Turnover and Conform. Now here's the key thing. I'm going to hold down the Command key when I do this, and you'll see how that little plus gets added to my cursor there. I'm making a copy by doing this. I don't want to move the original sequence. Maybe that's still being worked on, and this is just like a mid-process conform that I'm doing here for maybe a screener that needs to be relinked to the 4K footage. So I'm going to hold down the Command key, let go of my mouse, and this is going to make a copy of my sequence. And I'll go into my list view here so we can just see that this is a copy. And I might even give this a different name just so that there's no confusion about what this is. I'm going to put at the head of this turnover 1 to indicate that this is the first turnover. It's not uncommon to do this multiple times during a feature film edit over the course of many months. I'm going to go ahead and open up this copy of my sequence here, just so I have it. And again, I can see the name of it so that there's no confusion with the original edit that's over in that full edit aspect project. Another good practice, just go ahead and close that. You're not going to be working with it moving forward at all. In fact, we can probably close all projects but the one that we want here. So I'll right click on the project that I want and I'll use this menu choice here, close all other projects, so that we're just working in this Turnover and Conform project. Now, the key thing here is I want to make this sort of a self-contained project again. I need to get all the source clips that were scattered across multiple media projects within my production. I want copies of all those to live inside of this folder or in this project, and I want them to be linked to this copy of the sequence, so that when I right click on a clip and reveal in project, right now, if I were to do that, it's going to open up whatever dailies project that lived in. I don't want to do that. I want to be able to manipulate these clips. I want to be able to go in and unlink the media and relink the media without knocking anybody else's work offline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all in this sequence, Command A in this case, go up to the Edit menu, and I'm going to use this option here called Generate Source Clips for Media. So what this is going to do is it's going to create new bin items. It's going to create new clips in the bin for all of the media that I currently have selected. And so by doing this, what this is going to do is give me the ability to then work with these clips where I can go through and I can take these clips, knock them offline if I need to. I can choose to relink the media to a different clip. I can also make this kind of a standalone project if I needed to hand this off to somebody working outside of my production. Maybe there's somebody that's cutting together some social aspects and they just need a copy of the edit so that they can start pulling things that are going to be approved for use in maybe social media posts or promotional material. So this is a nice way of sort of generating all of your media in a sequence in one quick and easy way, so that you have access to it all and you can make this separate standalone project that's no longer associated across all your different media projects within the production. Hope you can see some value in that. I know there's a lot of different workflows I'm not talking about today that have the need to do this. But the great thing about it is it's easily available if you need it, but you never have to worry about like a bunch of duplicate clips showing up in your production that are unwanted. And that's a big benefit of working inside of productions. We are going to dive into the difference between relinking clips and reassociating clips. These are actually two separate functions when you work inside of a production. And I want to explain what each of those are, and then explain how you can go through if you ever have to move media or if projects get deleted out of your production accidentally, some ways to reassociate, to reconnect everything, get it all working again, depending on what has happened. Now, first off, I want to be clear between the difference between these two. Relinking clips, when we talk about needing to link up media, we are talking about when a clip in a bin goes offline. This is something that can happen manually. If I, take a clip in this particular project, right click on it, and I choose make offline, this will knock this particular clip offline in this project, and you can see that the icon actually changes to a question mark. So this is when we're getting into how this bin item, this clip inside of a Premiere Pro project, it's no longer linked or connected to the particular piece of media in question. And this is where we deal with relinking. Anytime that you have to go through and relink clips. If you're working inside of a production and you open up a project that contains a sequence inside of it, and the clips are unlinked in the sequence, and I think I might have an example in here someplace. It's always possible to relink on a sequence basis on individual clips. You can right click, and there is a link media option that you can find inside the right click menu. But the key thing to be aware of here is if you are working inside of a production and for some reason that production folder has to be moved to a different drive someplace, the way to approach relinking that production is to link up your media projects first, have all of your media projects open, go through and open every single one of your media projects, and then start opening up your sequence projects. If you do it in this order, you'll only have to relink the clips in the media projects. Your sequences will automatically inherit the new paths from your media projects. And so if you ever get in a situation where, all of your media had to go out, like a drive failed, you had to bring in a backup, it has a different name, everything has been knocked offline. The key way to relink in a production is to relink the media projects first, and then leave those projects open when you open up your sequence projects, and all of the clips in the sequences will relink. If you don't do it in this order, it can be a little frustrating because you can open up a sequence, everything is, you relink everything in the sequence, but then when you go to open up the media projects or you do a reveal in project, if those projects haven't been relinked, it'll start knocking your clips offline. It'll inherit the old path from the media project back into your timeline. So make sure and do it in the right order. Metadata and information comes from the media projects and moves into the sequence projects. So if you do everything there, leave those projects open when you open up your sequences, you won't have to relink everything over again. Now, what is reassociation? What is reassociation and relinking? Why are they two separate items? Reassociation is the relationship between the clips on a timeline and the clips in the bin. That ability to right-click on a clip and choose Reveal in Project is all based on an association between the clip in the timeline and whatever project that clip lives in the production in the bin. And there are some times where that can break. Usually it happens if somebody has deleted a project or they've moved a project out of the production folder. Or in some rare cases, if you start to manipulate like project names on a Finder level, we've seen some challenges there. But the biggest thing is to just make sure that that reassociation, there's a different way of fixing reassociation problems. And I want to kind of quickly touch on this. And to do this, I'm actually going to jump in my timeline to a graphics clip here that was rendered out of an application. So this is just a quick clip with some closing credits for this particular film. If I right click on this and I say reveal in project, it's going to give me a message saying project not found or project not found. It's basically saying, hey, we think this project or this clip lived in a project called such and such, and it'll actually list it off on screen for you. But we're not finding that project in your production anymore. So if you run into a situation like this, it's going to ask you whether you want to open that project manually. If you know for a fact that this clip lives in a particular project, and I happen to know that it's in the graphics and titles project, I can go ahead and click yes. And then I just need to browse using this box here to my production. In this case, I'm going to go into Century Movie Time, and I'm going to go into Media, and then I'm going to go into my graphics and titles project. I'm going to go ahead and select that and click open. Now, in other cases, you might actually see it might not find that particular clip. And in those situations, Premiere will actually offer to search all your open projects. So if you're running into a lot of problems with this, again, one solution is start opening up all of your source media projects. When you get to this stage, let Premiere go through and search for it. It will go through and it will search all of your different projects and try and find the clip in question. Now, there's even another way of handling this. If you're doing a lot of this, or you know for a fact that a lot of things have changed, you've got a lot of stuff that's broken, it's possible to select sequences, and there's some options that are found in the edit menu. You'll notice there's an option here called reassociate source clips. This can also be a useful tool if there are clips in your timeline that you need to reassociate to a specific project. This is a way of doing that. Now, the way this works, if you've got a timeline that's made up of clips that come from 20 different dailies projects, for example, you might have to do this 20 times. But this gives you that control of not having to go through a right-click menu and choose Reveal in Project and finding the broken bits. You can actually go through and you can sort of force a relink to specific projects using this as an option. So I'll go ahead and select this graphics and titles project here, click open. Any clips in the timeline that it finds in that graphics and titles project, those will now be relinked to the graphics titles project. So if there are clips that weren't found, it just ignores them. It leaves the pathing alone the way it was before. But in this situation, if for some reason something has completely moved to a different location, all of that association is broken. Just remember that you do have a menu command in here to kind of force a reassociation to a new location. This can be particularly useful if somebody has duplicated your source projects. If they've taken day one and someone has their own copy of it that they've moved into a folder. Shouldn't do that. Shame on you. But if you did it, now there's 2 copies of all that source media floating around. Premiere might not know which one you need to go to. And if you want to force a reassociation to the one that's in a particular editor's folder, this would be the methodology for doing that. Now, I want to stress this video should not be the primary way that you're working. We really, really recommend building productions as you go during the actual filming and the actual creation of your content. But in rare cases where you may have started off using a single project and something is kind of outgrown working in a single project, or now you want to take on some assistant editors that are going to help you with this, it can be necessary to convert an existing project into a production. Again, always better to do it natively. Just start with a production and kind of go from there. But if you have to do it, I'm going to try and teach you the best practices in how to make that go, where everything will stay reassociated, everything will stay associated with each individual piece, and everything will stay linked. So to get started, I'm actually going to start in Premiere, and I'm going to start. Let me just open up this project here that I have just to kind of showcase what this looks like. This is your typical project where I've got a media folder with a bunch of subfolders kind of organized in some different ways. And I've got a few sequences that somebody has been editing. And we've made the decision that we now need to convert this. Very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close this project. I don't want to get confused with any type of standalone project versus what's actually living inside of a production. And at this point, I haven't created the production yet. So the very first thing we're going to do is create a production. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and click on File, New Production. And I'm going to go ahead and call this one Conversion, since that's what we are doing today. You can see the other options in that panel there in one of our earlier videos in this series. But you can see now we have pretty much a blank production with that single untitled project. I'll leave that open for the time being. But the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and right-click in this empty space in the production panel and choose Add Project to Production. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and take that project that I want to convert, and I'm going to import it into the production. It'll make a copy of it. It'll add everything over, and we now have this project as part of this production. Now I'm going to go ahead and double click on it to open it up here so that we can kind of start taking a look at what's going on inside of this. And this is where I'm going to make some choices about how I want to organize this for multiple editors to work with. And so one of the ways we want to do that is probably break up the media into a bunch of smaller projects that each have the same structure as what we currently have inside of this media folder, which I can see here has just a lot of random stuff in it, including a couple sequences that I probably might not even bring across over into my production because I don't think they're very useful. So what I'm going to do here is start to kind of take this organization in this single project and replicate that in the production panel. So I might want to create a folder called Media. So we'll go ahead and create a folder called Media. I always like to have my media folder at the top of the list. So I'm going to put an O1 at the beginning of it and call it Media. And so that will just make sure that that is always the top item in my production. Then within this, I'm going to go ahead and start twirling down some of these folders here. And I can see I have some folders for things called Hills Ride, Forest Ride, Tunnel Ride. I'm going to focus on those three folders to begin with, just to give you an idea of what's to come here. As I look inside of each of these folders, I can see that each of these folders contains clips. That's a really good indication that this folder should become a Premiere Pro project by itself. So what I'm going to do is, with the media folder selected, I'm going to come down here and click on New Project. And I'm going to create a folder called O1 Hills Ride. So I'm basically mapping and mimicking what the original folder was called in the standalone project to create this new project. Now, this is where you might have to kind of play around with the organization of your different panels on your screen. I'm going to take this project O1 Hills Ride, and I'm going to bring it over and dock it at the bottom of this area where I have my production folder. Because what I want to be able to do is I want to see the original project called Project to Production, and I want to be able to see this Hills Ride project at the same time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to twirl down the folder called Hills Ride, and I'm going to select everything that's in this project or in this particular folder. And here is the crucial part. I'm not going to copy anything. I'm going to move it. That's right. I'm actually going to modify this project to production. And remember, when we import it into the production folder, we made a copy of it. That version that's on the desktop is still sitting there. That's going to remain untouched. That's kind of a nice backup element. If I don't like productions and I want to roll back, it's still sitting there. But the idea here is I want to make sure and maintain all of the links between the associations between these clips and the sequences they live on. And so in order to do that, I need to move things, not make copies. When you're in a production, when you grab clips and you drag them from one project to another, it moves them. It does that automatically. It's a little bit of a different behavior when you're inside of a production, is dragging something from one project to another is actually moving that element. If you need to make a copy, you can hold down the command or control key, and that will make a copy. But the important thing here is basically I have this Hills Ride project. I want to make sure that the Hills Ride folder in the original standalone project is empty. And now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hit Save Project to save those changes. And I'll also, in fact, it's also a good habit to save the standalone project at the same time so that all that data, all the sequences that used clips from the Hills Ride folder now know that those clips now live in a completely separate project. Now I'm going to continue doing this exact same thing with the Forest Ride. I'll select my media project here media folder in the production, and I'll say new project, and I'll call this one 02 Forest Ride. And so now I have a project called Forest Ride. Again, I'm going to go ahead and dock it over in this same area over here. And notice that I'm leaving the Hills Ride project open. During this conversion process, everything that I create, I'm going to leave it open. That is going to ensure that metadata is getting passed between the different projects to maintain all of those associations with the various sequences. So now in this Forest Ride project, I'm going to take all the clips that are in the Forest Ride folder, select them all, and again, drag to move them into the Forest Ride project. I'm going to go ahead and there is a menu command called Save All. This is something that can be mapped to a keyboard shortcut, and a lot of productions users will actually map the Command S or Control S to just save everything since they're working in many small projects at any given time. We'll go ahead and save everything. So now I've basically taken all these media projects are now living in the media folder. I still have the original project is still open here. I've also got this untitled project that I probably want to do something with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this one 05 Sequences. And I'm going to go ahead, actually, I've accidentally put it, see, I had the media folder selected there. I'm going to actually just drag it to pull it out so it's on the top level with the media folder. So when I twirl up my media project, I can still see my sequences folder. I'm going to change the name of this untitled project. And I am going to call this one Beach Carl. And in fact, I might want to give it a number as well. Since I don't know where it's going to be, I'm going to call it 50. Beach Carl. Since this is my editing project, I've been editing some of the footage of the beach. That's why I've got my name in it, and I'm calling it Beach Carl. And I'm going to drag this and put it and move it into the sequences folder so that it's living in there. And just like I did before, I'm going to leave the original standalone project in the original location on the screen, but I'm going to move the Beach Carl project over to this left-hand side here. So you know what I'm going to put in this? I'm going to put one item. I'm going to put my edit. So now I'm moving the sequence over into the beach Carl project. So now I know that all my footage from the beach, or all my selects that I've made from the beach, are now going to live inside of this project here. And it's a sequence-based project. Again, we'll hit Save All. Just saves all that metadata. And from here, I would continue to work through this. I would go into the tunnel project and probably make a media project for tunnel ride footage. The rest of these, I would make some decisions. I've got a drone project. I've also got some other sequences floating around in here. I can see that here's one called Red Cuts. Maybe I know that this is actually a sequence that Karina is working on. So I'm going to go ahead and add her name onto this. So I want to make sure that she has an editing project that's separate from any other editing projects. So here in the production, again, I will create a new project and I will call it Karina. And then I'm going to move that Red Cuts sequence into Karina's project. Now, I just almost did something there that you shouldn't try and do. You can never take media and drag it and drop it into the production panel. What I need to do is make sure that I've got that project open and I've got it available to me on screen here. So that way I can drag it and drop it and I can see that sequence has left the standalone project and it's now living in the Karina project. So by doing this, by having all of these different items open, by saving everything during this conversion process, it's going to ensure that as you're moving clips so that they're now living in separate projects from the sequence, eventually I should get to a point where this original standalone project is just sort of an empty shell of itself. Nothing should be left in it that I'm going to be actively using moving forward. Or I can treat it as an archive if I have a bunch of old folders and stuff here I don't really think I'm going to touch. I can just leave it in the production if I need it for some reason. But pretty much everything that's actively being worked on should either go into a media project or a sequence project within the production so that we can continue to move forward. Once this happens, you should be ready to go. And at this point, that's where you, again, just want to make sure, save everything you've worked on. And that's where you can start to close things down that you're not going to be working on. So I could probably at this point close the original standalone project. I'm not going to be working in that so much. I'm going to be working in my Carl project using this beach setup here. And then I might be adding some additional footage from maybe the Forest Ride project. So I might open that up. And this is where I could probably move this back over here to start cutting some of the forest footage into my editing sequence as necessary. So by doing this, all the relinking should stay linked up. Right-clicking on this clip, revealing it in the project should go to the, this particular clip here is part of the forest. So when I right-click on this and say reveal in project, it should go to the forest project. If you ever have a situation where you right-click on something and say reveal in project, and it goes back to the original production, like what you just saw here, that means that maybe you might have had some duplicate clips, or you might have had some footage that wasn't quite organized as well as you thought it was. Now I can see, hey, wait a minute, there's another folder in here and it has some additional forest footage in it. I'm going to put that in the forest project. So again, I'll take the forest project, move it over here, come back over. And this is a case where I might want to, instead of twirling down a folder here, I might actually want to double click on that folder so that I can look at this in a thumbnail view and I can try and find and see, well, wait a minute, where is that forest footage? There's a bunch of it in here. So now I can select a bunch of this and I can choose to move all of this over into the forest project as I'm starting to organize things.